Donald Trump wanted to keep these grants of clemency and pardons quiet. No major announcements. It was done, with all the other chaos that's out there. New York Times did a really good expose, though, just talking about how over the past week, there have been a number of people that Donald Trump has pardoned who are been involved in some massive, massive fraud. So at the same time, while Donald Trump's out there saying fraud this, fraud that, it continues a pattern of Donald Trump pardoning or granting clemency to some of the biggest fraudsters who are out there, and including like recidivist pardons, like people who he's pardoned during the first term and now he's pardoning again. So hat tip to Ken Vogel and Suzanne Craig, who wrote this incredible article, Trump Set Fraudsters Free from Prison a Second Time. And it talks about this raft of clemency grants that took place this week, including pardoning a woman who had given relief, who he had given the clemency relief to once before, and a man whose daughter donated millions of dollars to a Trump super PAC. And some of the commonalities here are you've either overtly donated a lot of money to Trump super PACs, or you've hired Trump's lawyers like Christopher Keiss, who represented Donald Trump before, and others like that. Let's just go through this article quickly, and then I want to talk about it a little more. So it talks about how in 2021, this convicted fraudster, Adriana Cambreros, was freed from prison when Trump commuted the sentence then. And then Cambreros, after getting clemency the first time, her and her brother were convicted in 2024 in an unrelated fraud. One of the frauds they were engaged in was selling counterfeit 5-hour energy drinks, and they were convicted on that. Then it talks about another lucky recipient, a man whose daughter had given millions of dollars to a Trump-backed super PAC, a former governor of Puerto Rico, and a former FBI agent, all of whom had pleaded guilty in a political corruption case. And it goes on to talk about how there are other white-collar crimes that have been pardoned for fraud as well. And again, you go through this, and the commonality is, you have this person like Mr. Herrera. Julio Herrera was involved in this bribery scandal with the governor of Puerto Rico, for which they were convicted. Herrera's daughter, Isabella, donates $2.5 million to MAGA Inc., a super PAC devoted to Donald Trump and his allies. Her father's lawyer, Christopher Keiss, who was one of the lead lawyers on Donald Trump's legal defense team, negotiated an unusually lenient sentence with Trump's DOJ. Everybody got misdemeanors. Then they donated another $1 million, and then you get the pardon or the clemency grant. So this article highlights all of these individuals who have been, convicted of really bad things. And again, the commonality is the lawyers as well. A lawyer by the name of Adam Katz represented Rudy Giuliani in a defamation case related to his effort. He representing Cambreros. Let me bring in Harry Litman from the Talking Feds YouTube channel, Talking Feds Substack, and the Talking Feds podcast. Harry, it is great to have you on. Not great to talk about this topic. Good reporting by the New York Times. None of this is normal. I mean, as you know, as a former leader at the DOJ, you're familiar with the pardon process. You weren't a pardon attorney, but you're familiar with the process. That they used to have whole teams like Liz Oyer, who was pushed out, a pardon attorney. And there would be teams, and there would be some basic floors that you had to even clear to be considered. They would consider the time since the offense. They'd consider all of the work you've done since then about, is there good gestures that you've done? Have you turned your life around? Have you done all of these things? But they would throw out a lot of applications just based on the timing of when it took place. Not to say that there hadn't been controversial pardons in the past, but you look at Trump's pardon record, and it is the most corrupt of corrupt every single day. And then you look even at his pardon of the J6ers, seditious conspiracy, horrific crimes that were committed by these January 6th insurrectionists. And, wrapped in there as well, they may have inadvertently pardoned the pipe bomber or the suspected pipe bomber who's saying, you know what? You said everybody on J6 gets a pardon. I'm a J6 person. I supported you twice, Donald, and I planted the pipe bomb, or suspected of planting the pipe bomb because I believed your election stuff, your election lies. So, Harry, what do you make of it?
Look, for sheer venality, sheer departure is an understatement, sheer complete contradiction of the purpose. I gotta say that Trump's use of the pardon power, and we're talking from Trump 1.0 and Sheriff Joe, is as corrupt, more corrupt, I would say, than any other feature of his power. And we're talking, by the way, this would include, but for the immunity decision, a series of pardons that look very much like tit for tat and quid pro quo. In other words, crimes, but for the Supreme Court's immunizing him from being investigated. But it's, as you say, these are not just guidelines. There's a purpose in general in a evolved justice system, and then the department that's always followed. And I'm talking about for the controversial pardons. When Mark Rich was pardoned, it was through that process and people weighing in and saying yes or no or why. You go first and foremost to the agency or prosecutors that convicted the guy. You want to hear their views. The notion of a pardon, Ben, is that someone has been convicted, has served the sentence, has admitted to guilt, and has shown a rehabilitated life and return to productivity. Nothing could be farther from the description of the typical Trump pardonee, who is either someone who says, fuck you to the deep state, I never did anything wrong, or says, here's a $2.5 million check. Can I have the pardon, please, Mr. President? There are guidelines here. Liz Oyler oversaw them, as you say, with a staff of like 40. You look into it because you are duty bound to do this according to the constitutional scheme and what the founders talked about. The reason for pardons is to be part and parcel of a general criminal justice system, a kind of safety, not safety valve for people who haven't done the crime, exactly for people who have and have had an exemplary rehabilitation, precisely not for people who feather the president's nest or have some kind of, political support for him, as in the J6 case. So he's doing things every day that are dangerous and damaging, et cetera. But for just a crystalline example of this is what the law says, this is what this guy is doing, you can't get farther apart and more diametrically opposed than what he is doing on pardons. This is the latest. And let me just say, from the absurd to the ridiculous, the very notion of someone you pardon, they screw up and go back, making clear that the first pardon should never have been granted. And then you do it again. That is truly from another planet. And, Trump has just taken this as his private toys in his little sandbox. And it's a disservice to the public. It's a disservice to the public safety goals of the criminal justice system. It's a disservice to plain old morality, equity, the reasons we have pardons in the first place. So, man, and as you say, he did this raft of them quietly. He seems to get worse and worse and more raw about it. Show me the money, or, otherwise be on my side. And here's the pre-printed pardon for you next.
We all know where this is headed. He's going to give himself and everybody in the cabinet and everybody in the administration a blanket pardon. We know
Dr.
that's where
Ross.
Everybody, we know Hegseth, Noam, you name it. I think the document says anybody who has been in this administration, and he'll have to with exclusions of the people who they fired and didn't like, so it'll say, unless your name's on this list, the list will be, and roll this tape 2 years from now, the list will be who's not pardoned, but then everybody else gets will get a blanket pardon. And there's let's conclude with this. Our system was built on good faith and the idea that power would be wielded wisely in the hand of the president. And for all of the great compliments that our founders get, perhaps we need to look more critically, about the system, because if a system has all of these, it worked fine for 250 years, but when a system has the level of loopholes that it does, and perhaps you could blame the Supreme Court for finding absolute immunity or whatever, you look to other systems and you start to think, does it make more sense to have a more parliamentary system where the leader of your party has to go through the ranks and has to show they can work with people? And maybe you get a boring person or whatever, but you don't get, someone who can appeal to hatred and be anointed in this way, because it's not a political thing for me. It really isn't. I'd be fine if there was someone who behaved normally and we can just disagree collegially on issues. It's just at such another level, Harry. And I know this wasn't the point of this video for me to start saying things like that. But when you see things
it's a really good point, man, because let's go back to the founders and let's nerd out for a few seconds at the end of this tape. They understood, they did all these things, but there's a lot of statements saying if you get a total sociopathic tyrant in office, there's only so much that can be done. And that's what we are living through there. And it's not that they didn't foresee the risk. It's that there's, they put all these laws up, but if in the hands of someone who doesn't give a crap, not just about laws, but norms and reputation and all of it, the democracy is very, very vulnerable. That's where we are. But I just want to say again, it's, when an indictment of history is handed down, the damage of other things may be greater, but the departure, the rank derogation and contempt for what the law is about when it comes to pardons, I think is unsurpassed under Trump. And I realize that's saying quite a lot.
Harry, appreciate you so much. Thanks for all that you do. Everybody subscribe to Harry Litman's Substack, his podcast and his YouTube channel. It's called Talking Feds. Subscribe there. Thanks, Harry.
Hey, thanks, Ben.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.